Great. I'm looking to see who was here last week. And I know Lila was here last week. So Lila, you're going to be my personal helper this morning, okay? Because, hi, how are you? Well, you were here a few weeks ago, sort of. All right. So I have to review really briefly last week, but I'm not going to take very long on it. Last week we learned a Hebrew word. Lila, it was really long. I just went blank. Oh my goodness. Hold on, let me see if I have it on my notes. Brother. It was a very long Hebrew word. Yes, here it is. Makashava. Good grief. All right, makashava was our word last week, and it means that he makes a plan. Okay, and we talked about my husband made a bus, and he didn't make a bus. He took a bus, a school bus, and he took all the seats out, and he started to turn it into a house. So you make a plan. You get a piece of paper, and you write all the notes on it, and you figure out how you're going to turn this into something. Have you guys ever made anything like a tree house, or what? What are some things you've made? A candy house. Did you make a plan before you did it, or you just start making it? Yeah, just started making it. Yeah. Have you ever made a craft where you had to go to the store first and buy all the craft supplies? That's making a plan, right? Okay. Exactly. So if Yehovah has a makashava, and it plans for you, and he knew exactly how it would all turn out. I have a question today. Can anything mess up his makashava, his plan? Can anything mess it up? You're sure? You're very confident of that? You look very confident. I'm going to open up a Bible story and see if you're right. I don't know. Okay, so I'm going to read it. Okay. The serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field. All right. Jehovah made him, but he said to the woman, "Did God really say you can eat of any tree in the garden?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We can eat of any fruit of any tree in the garden, but the fruit of the tree that's in the middle of the garden," God said, "don't eat it and don't touch it, or you'll die." He said, "Don't eat it," but did he say don't touch it? No, he didn't. No, she added extra to it, but that's okay. Anyway, it isn't okay, but we'll keep going. So the serpent said, "You won't actually die. God knows that in the day you eat that fruit, you'll become just like him, because your eyes will be opened and you'll know good and evil. You'll be so smart." Now, I want to stop for a second. Is this serpent coming in to mess up God's plan? Why is he trying to mess it up? He's evil. He's bad. He doesn't like God. He wants to mess up his makashava. He wants to be like him, good. And what's the best way he could mess up his plan? Well, Yehovah made the whole world full of beautiful things, and he made people. Yes, how could he mess it up? By lying. And the best way, I would think, is to kill all the people. That would mess up his plan, since he made the whole world just for people, right? So if he could kill all the people, then it would mess up his plan, right? And if he could get them to eat of the tree, they would die, and it wouldn't be him that killed them. They would kill themselves, huh? Very sneaky. So can he mess up Yehovah's plan? It looks like he can, because in the next chapter, or in the next page, it says that the woman, she looked at the fruit, and she said, And she reached out her hand, and her husband didn't stop her, and she took and went, okay. Yehovah's plan's completely messed up. We're only in chapter 3 of the Bible, and it's completely messed up. I think we should all go home now. Right? Okay. Thankfully, Yehovah has a plan for the plan that messes up. I call this a plan B. Like plan A is the first thing you can do, and if it messes up, you have a plan B. Yehovah had this from the very beginning. Lila, we talked last week about how he knows our birthdays, and he knows our names, and he knows all about us. And he knew this was going to happen too. So he said, I'm going to send somebody who is going to take this snake and get rid of him. Now, how do you get rid of a snake? How do you kill a snake? Does anyone know? What's the best? Chase it? Yeah, well, but it could come back. How else can you get rid of it? Go ahead. Throw it? But would it come back? Hit it with a stick? Okay, I like that idea. Let's hit it with a stick. All right, so do you hit it right here? No, you hit it on the head. Why do you have to hit it on the head? Because if you hit it on the tail, it could come back around and get you, right? You wouldn't want to do that. So you have to get it right here. But I'm scared to do that to a snake. How many of you guys like snakes? Oh, well, I wouldn't want to do it. So, you do? Okay, poisonous, dangerous, deadly snakes. Would you do that? Okay. All right, I'm going home now. All right. So he said this is what he's going to do. He said he was going to send someone, and the snake would go up to that person and bite him on the heel. Now, if you got bit on the heel with a snake, wouldn't that kill you if it was a deadly snake? Could. But that person was going to turn around and crush the snake's head, which would kill the snake forever, wouldn't it? Wouldn't be able to, it wouldn't, but yes, it would, even Satan. So, who was it that he sent a man that tried to get to, and he got him to, didn't actually bite him on the heel, but what he did is it killed him. He died on the cross for us, but what was Yehovah's makashava? He rose again. You've got it right. He rose again. Uh-oh, poor snake. And then what's Yeshua going to do? He's going to come back and he's going to crush him right on the head. Has that happened yet? Satan's still around, isn't he? But Yeshua's coming. When he does, he's going to get rid of that snake forever and ever. And he'll never be able to hurt anyone again. The plan is still working. Do you think that Satan is trying to see what he can do to mess it up again? How could he mess it up? What's the first way he messed it up? What did he do the first time? He came to Eve and he said, did God really say that? And then Eve was tempted to do something bad, right? So what do you think he's going to do this time? He's going to come up to any of you and he's going to say, did God really say that? You can do whatever you want to. You don't have to listen to God. And don't listen. Don't be like Eve, right? Because he is still around. But thankfully, Yeshua is coming. And he's going to, I like doing that. That's pretty fun. You want to do it? You can do it. Squish him. You pass it around. Everybody do it. What were you going to say? He sure can. So we shouldn't listen. We shouldn't be like Eve, should we? Yeah, crush him. Yeah. There you go. Get rid of him. All right, and then we should go sit down.
Thank you, Mrs. Elliott, for that wonderful teaching on how to crush the head of a snake. May we, through our willingness to say no to the deceiver, the adversary, be able to crush his head and be able to stay away from sin and his deceitfulness. All right, last week, we continue learning about the beginning of the book of Genesis and the creation account, and we spoke about light and the understanding of the lights and how they were brought forth as part of Yehovah's creation. We see that the lights rule the day and night and tell us when to meet with our Heavenly Father for the Moedim. One thing I didn't get into much last week, but remembered this week as I was studying ahead, this deals with the understanding of YHVH's idea of days. And that is, what I mean by that is that when we think of starting our day, when do we start our days usually? In the morning, right? And our mindset starts with sunrise and goes to the next sunrise. But when we look at YHVH's idea of days, we see that it starts with the evening first, then morning, as it tells us in Genesis 1:5 and other places throughout Scripture, and especially throughout Genesis chapter 1. So he starts his days in the evening and works towards the morning and returns again to evening. So night to day, not day to night, today like most of Western culture does it. Why is this important? This matters because it shows us when connection begins. It explains when the Moedim begin. It explains when we connect with our Heavenly Father. So especially on the weekly Shabbat. So we, the Elliott family, as a family, has the opportunity each week that we, in order to make Shabbat something different than the rest of the week, we strive to set aside the Shabbat in various unique ways. And we try to have, obviously we prep everything to get ready for the Shabbat, so we don't have to do anything like working and cooking and things on the Shabbat. And we try to clean up the house, and we try to set a table that looks nice with, like tablecloths and silverware and things like this, and try to make everything look nice and special, different than the rest of the week and how we do our weekly meals and stuff. And so that what that does for us is it helps us to be reminded that we are setting apart this day. It's unique from the rest of the days. And of course, when does that start? In the evening, right? As the sun sets, our desire is to have everything ready to go for the rest of the day for the Shabbat. And so our kids and us and everybody takes part in making sure that that is what happens. And so it becomes the idea of, in our minds, it helps us to separate his Shabbat from the rest of the week. It is in the evening we begin our rest. We stop striving. We lay down our work. Then we wake refreshed to enjoy YHVH. Shabbat is not about collapse, it's about renewal. In Isaiah chapter 58, verses 13 and 14, it says that Shabbat is to be a delight to us. And I think about the opportunity to come here and to celebrate with all my brothers and sisters in Messiah, to fellowship, to praise, and the refreshing that comes from resting from our work and coming together as the body of Messiah. And I think about that as Paul is part of Yah's creative acts and how he set this apart and the blessing that it is for us. As my wife was speaking about plans, as we think about this and going on in today's message, YHVH had a perfect plan for the lights in his universe as a whole. All things were formed in their place and had boundaries set for them by their Creator. This leads me to the rest of Genesis 1 today. We're going to start our reading this morning in verses 11 and 12 of Genesis 1, if you want to go there. We're going to be starting by talking about kinds. YHVH and the word kinds. So read with me in verse 11. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth," and it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, the herb that yields seed according to its kind, and the tree that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. If we go a little further to Genesis to verse 20, we see the kind of the continuation of this. And we dealt with the lights and stuff in between in verses 13 through 19 last week. But then it goes on in 20 through 25, and it says, "Then God said, let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth, across the face of the firmament of the heavens. So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded, according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. So the evening and the morning were the fifth day. Then God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing and beast of the earth, each according to its kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good." So we see this word kind mentioned several times and throughout there. And we see that Yehovah has a classification system starting here in Genesis 1 dealing with his creation. And the term there is kinds. In the Hebrew, it's the word mean. All right? And it's not spelled M-E-A-N, but it's pronounced like the English word M-E-A-N, so mean. And it means to portion out, sort, or put according to its form. That word is used 31 times in the Tanakh, and it is used only by Yehovah. And it's always tied to reproduction, like seed and the progeny of things that come after from the source to something else. Now, when I think about this, I look into like our modern day and science and things like that, we clearly see that man likes to classify things too, doesn't he? And I think that is because of our Creator. I like to talk a lot about when we think about things of the Scripture, we oftentimes do what we call pigeonhole things, right? You ever heard that term, pigeonhole? Anybody know where it comes from? You know, we think about, so if you think of, I've actually met a guy who trained pigeons, and he would go on races, and they would like go and do these races where they would fly the pigeons, and they were supposed to go to a certain location and then come back to the home nest, and whoever did that the fastest won and got the most birds back. But when you think about that, we do a lot more chickens than pigeons. How many people have chickens? Okay, and you think of nest boxes. Okay, so like a typical, if you have like 10 chickens, you might have like 4 nest boxes. Am I right on that? Am I close? Well, think of that idea, but when you have pigeons, each pigeon gets its own nesting box. And so if you have a person who has a flock of, say, 30 pigeons, they're going to have 30 holes where the pigeons sleep at night. So that is your pigeonholes. All right, so when you pigeonhole someone, what you're doing is you're putting things into each of those spots and trying to organize all of your pigeons. All right, and humans like to organize things. And I think that comes because our Creator is a God of order, and He's created us like Him. So when we think about theology, though, we oftentimes want to make sure that we all have everything figured out, and so we try to narrow things down to very specific theological ideas, and then we make sure that, okay, this is your idea where you're going to go here, and this is my idea, and I'll go here, so that we can try and classify and organize where everybody's at, so we can understand them better. That's the idea of, in lots of ways, how we like to organize our lives, how we like to organize what our beliefs and everything like that. The thing about mankind is we often try to one-up our Creator. And such is the case of classification systems. We try to connect everything and make it fit into neat little compartmentalized groups. And that leads me to the word that we oftentimes use today versus the biblical word that's mentioned here in Genesis 1. The word we use today is species. How many have ever heard of the word species before? All right? And what species do humans belong to? Anybody? My wife is Homo sapiens, right? In the scientific classification, Homo sapiens is what we belong to, and it tells kind of where we are at in this classification system. You know, and then you go back and you have all these other classification systems, and when the classification system is looked at, if you looked at all where we're supposed to come from, it tells you a lot about what the person who made the classification system believes, doesn't it? The idea of species is a man-made classification system. It began being formulated in the 1600s, and it connected. Its job was to connect concretely to the theory of evolutionary biology. So it was started in the 1600s. Along came 200 years later, Carl Linnaeus and another man by the name of Charles Darwin, and they used that classification system to develop their theory of evolutionary biology. And what they wanted to do was to put everything in a very specific thing. So how many of you have ever heard the term mammals before? Kids, you ever heard the term mammals before, right? And Homo sapiens, or humans, are supposed to be mammals, right? That's the classification system that we were put into by man. Is that a biblical thing, though? Don't answer that yet. So when we look at this classification system, they tried to convey very specific, unique characteristics about every organism, and that would put things in there. But you know what they found? They found that certain things didn't fit anywhere. And those began to puzzle them. Okay, what are we going to do? This doesn't fit any of our classification system. And these things that didn't fit became missing links, in between, somewhere in the evolutionary process, things that didn't make sense were stuck in there and said, well, this must be one of those things where we don't see it today because it's died off, but at one point in time it was the middle between us and the other things before us in the evolutionary process. Some things that you maybe have heard of before that are kind of typically used like this. Platypus. How many of you have ever heard of a platypus? Okay. Unique creature, has fur, has milk glands. It nurses its young from the milk glands, but it lays eggs and has a duck bill. You know, and has a beaver tail. Very unusual creature. There's other creatures that have very similar things to it. Like there's a thing called an echidna, which kind of looks like a hedgehog and an anteater stuck together. And it does very similar characteristics to a platypus, which are different than any other what we call mammals. How many of you have ever heard of a coelacanth? Have you ever heard of a coelacanth? No coelacanth people, huh? Okay, one person there. It was supposed to be an extinct fish that they thought had like basically fins that were becoming arms. They saw it all over the place in fossils and records, and they thought this was one of the fish that first became fish and started to come on land as an amphibian. They made up this great story about it until some Madagascar fishermen got one in their nets and found it alive. All of a sudden, it was no longer a in-between evolutionary process animal. It was a live and living animal still today. And guess what? It was still a fish. Another one, Archaeopteryx. Have you ever heard of that one? Probably if I showed you a picture of one, you'd understand. It's the one that looks like a bird. It has bird, it's a fossil, they only have in fossils, and it's a bird, but it has a beak kind of, but it has teeth in its beak. And its structure of its skeleton is a little different than birds. But it has, in all the fossil records, they have actual imprints of the feathers on this thing. So throughout the last 100 or so years, that's been used as a go-between between saying that reptiles evolved into birds. And so if you go on, this is taught all over the place. Now, if you go and you begin to research into this, though, you will see that Archaeopteryx has it has characteristics that are similar to some reptiles, and it has some characteristics that are similar to birds. There aren't many birds that have teeth in their beaks. There are some that have little ridges. Like if you've ever been bit by a goose, you probably understand. They have little ridges that are kind of like teeth on their beaks, but they're not real teeth. They're just ridges. And you have some that, like birds that walk on two legs and don't fly, like an ostrich, right? But if you understand the way that the Archaeopteryx was, and they believe it could fly by the way it has its wing structure, things like that go, it doesn't have anything similar to dinosaurs. It can't be a dinosaur. And so if you begin to research this, you begin to see that a lot of what we call creation researchers, creation scientists, biologists and stuff, have began to see one of two things. Either one, this is a bird. It's just birds that don't have similarities to things today, but back sometime before the flood, these birds existed. Or, and some are starting to say this is an extinct kind of bird. The entirety of this kind of bird, for whatever reason, went extinct. And it's neat. It has similarities to both things, but it's not an in-between between a bird and a lizard. How many of you do you like Jurassic Park movies? Okay, I like science fiction and all that stuff too. It's Jurassic Park movies. The first Jurassic Park movie had velociraptors. Have you ever heard of Velociraptor? If you go back and watch that one again, you'll see the velociraptors, and they look like dinosaurs, a little smaller, and they have these big claws on them, and they're the antagonist, part of the antagonist in the movie. Then if you go and you watch the latest version of Jurassic Park, the latest in the movie, all of a sudden the velociraptors have feathers on them. And they begin to look like part birds and part dinosaurs. Why do you think that is? Well, because since the first Jurassic Park came out 20 plus years ago, it was 32 years ago. Wow, that's old. So in the last 32 years, the establishment, scientific establishment, has come to believe that velociraptors were actually in between dinosaurs and birds, and so they have to have feathers, and they have to have more bird-like aspects to them because they have to be in betweens, even though there is no scientific evidence to this. But because we believe that has to be the case. So the way they want, in order to fit their paradigm, their ideas of what they believe, they have to have these species in here in the right, proper way in their classification system. Yah isn't as specific and allows for the brilliance of his creativity to shine without leaving any of his creation out. If you look at verse 20 in Genesis chapter 1, it talks about the fact that there are the fowl of the earth, the things, let the fowl of the earth be in the skies and to fly about. But if you look at the Hebrew of that word, it's not talking about birds that fly or fowl as the King James Version translates it. But in the context of the kind that is there spoken of, it talks about flying creatures. Okay? There's a bit of a difference between a bird and a flying creature, isn't there? The Hebrew word is oph, and it means flying creatures, and it includes birds, bats, insects, bugs. So when God said, let the skies be filled with creatures, flying creatures, it included all of those things. Everything that has wings and can fly was created on this day. We go into the next one there, and it talks about the creatures of the sea. The Hebrew word there is sheretz, and it means teeming or swarming things. And it means the creatures of the sea, all of them. So that means the giant whales, down to the itty-bittiest little mites that float around in the ocean, were all created on this same day. And God says those are after their kinds. They're similar things. not as specific as ours, and we don't understand all of what may have been there because what was there back then isn't what we see today. And I like to share this just in case people don't understand. How many dog types are there today? What we call breeds. Have you noticed that there's a new word out there? So we have species, but then we have breeds, don't we? Right? So when we look around and you talk about an evolutionist, they'll usually teach you about evolution using breeds. See, in the last 150 years, we've gone from, let's say, 20 dog breeds to 200 different dog breeds. What's going on there? Are those different species of an animal? Well, not even evolutionary biologists believe those are different species. They believe they're all the same. But they're all dogs, and they all come from the same thing, a master dog that had all the genetic code of all the different things that we see out in the world. So a Chihuahua and a Poodle at one time came from the same dog. So when God created the dogs, all the dogs had the genetic code for everything that we see today. Those are breeds that we see. They are not different kinds. You can breed a Chihuahua and a Poodle. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can breed it. And all those things came from wolves. And we have wolves and we have foxes, the wild creatures, and hyenas and dingoes and things like this. But those are all dogs. They're all the same. And at one time, they were all coming from one kind. They are not different species. And yes, man can take and breed those to get certain techniques and certain characteristics they want, but then we're not creating a new species or a new kind, are we? So we see here in God's system a functional system that's not forced. Creation works because it obeys its order and the order of its master. And when you think about this, we can breed animals and all these dogs and stuff because we understand the order. It's when we go outside the order that we begin to have problems. Psalms 148. Verses 5 and 6 says, "Let them praise the name of Jehovah, for he commanded and they were created. He also established them forever and ever. He made a decree which shall not pass away." When God created things, he created them exactly the way he wanted them. And they had all the ability to do everything that's in our amazing world today. But we also see in the scriptures that each kind has boundaries set for them. The grass, the herbs, the trees have boundaries set for them. The sea creatures are supposed to be in the sea. They don't get out and walk on land, do they? They stay in the sea. Land creatures are on land. They don't all of a sudden get wings and fly. Flying creatures are for the air. They don't all of a sudden become fish, do they? And they stay in the water for the rest of their lives. Kinds don't move from one set boundary to the other. They only move within the boundaries set by Jehovah. And these boundaries are not a punishment. They are design. When we look at our Creator and he talks about boundaries, boundaries are a good thing. Boundaries are things that he sets in order to keep order in his world. The problem comes when we as humans try to surpass the created order of God and his boundaries and do things against what he put in place for his creation. So we see that all things our great Elohim has done in Genesis 1 are meticulous and amazing. They're full of unique design and character. We see things like various weird bugs, like a stick bug. How many of you have ever seen a stick bug before? You know, I look at stick bugs, and we see them outside or on TV and different documentaries and stuff. And our family talks about the fact when we see creatures like this that Yehovah must have gotten bored towards the end of day 6 and decided he was just going to have fun the rest of the day. You know, the last couple hours, he's like, okay, I'm done. Now what am I going to do? And he just started, I'm going to do that. And that one's funny. And I'm going to do that one over there too. And he just had great time deciding that these last couple hours, all the fun things he was going to make. And it just sometimes has to make you laugh when you see some of the creatures. How many of you ever heard of a blobfish before? A blobfish, okay? If you notice it, when they bring them up and they catch these blobfish, it looks like a giant blob with a huge cartoonish nose. And they're kind of a pinkish, slimy thing when they get them in the surface. And that's what they thought they looked like, and so they would go around and artists would make like depictions of what they looked like when they were floating through the ocean stuff. Now that we have all these submersibles that can go down to the depths where blobfish live, 20,000 feet under the sea and stuff, they've actually caught pictures of them. And at that depth, they look like normal fish. See, what happens is that they are meant to be at a certain pressure level with the depths of the ocean. And when they come up to a lighter pressure up here at the surface of the earth, they no longer can hold their form, and it turns them into a totally silly-looking, different kind of a creature than what they are in reality in their boundary. Yehovah, from the words of the text, loved each of his creatures, and he said that they were good. But I think when I look at the scriptures, he saved his best creative work for last. If you go back to our first discussion on Genesis 1, verses 1 and 2, we talked about God created the heaven and the earth. And we said the earth was without form and it was void, and I talked about that. I don't think that's a thing of chaos. I think it was a thing that it was not where it was supposed to be. It was not good because it was not ready to be, it was just getting ready to be into things that God really wanted it to be in. He was setting up the building blocks, so to speak. In the Common English version for Genesis 1:2, it says, the earth was barren with no form of life. It was under a roaring ocean covered with darkness, but the Spirit of God was moving over the water. So we see that it was without form and void. It was the absence of completeness, the absence of order and structure yet. God says, or God doesn't say at the end of day 1 that it was good. Day 2 also ends, and there is no it was good, because it was not complete. It did not fulfill the action for which it was created yet. The elements of all creation life, water, earth, light, were all there, but they have not fulfilled their purpose. They are not, as we were talking about, tov or good. It isn't until day 3, when the original heavens and earth are beginning to be developed into orderly things, that God begins to call his creative work good. So we see structure emerges, land appears, vegetation begins. For the first time, after all those things, God says it was good. Function meets purpose. And this brings us to the beginning of Genesis 2 and verse 4. If you would turn over there to Genesis 2 and verse 4. This here is a synopsis of what went on during Genesis chapter 1 in the creation account. And so in Genesis 2, it's not a new creation, it's a different way of saying it. It's like a summation, so to speak, in these first verses. So in there in verse 4, it says, this is the history of the heavens and the earth when they were created. In the day that Yehovah Elohim made the earth and the heavens, before any plant of the field was in the earth, and before any herb of the field had grown. For Yehovah Elohim had not caused it to rain on the earth, and there was no man to till the ground. But a mist went up from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. So if we go back to Genesis 1, we see that the earth came out of the water, created the firmament and the heavens and all that stuff. And that's the beginning. There's nothing else created yet on there. And that correlates to what we're seeing here in Genesis 2, verse 4. The earth was still formless and void. It was not good. But it had the building blocks. Remember my analogy, the Legos, ready to be built. The blocks of Legos. But it was not a structure yet. So this brings us to the beginning of Genesis 2 and verse 4. Excuse me there. So this was where we're at in Genesis 2, verse 4. But then it continues on there. And YHVH says it was not finished yet. In verse 7 of Genesis 2, it says, And YHVH Elohim formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living thing. YHVH Elohim brought the pinnacle of his creation to life after everything else on the sixth day from the formless and void earth. He called him Adam, man. The ayat term there means ruddy or reddish or blood or earth. All those words kind of connect together in the term Adam in Hebrew. So you can see that, obviously, with mankind, when we come to life, we have blood rushing through us, and blood is red. Blood has the concept of life, doesn't it, in Scripture? We see also that the earth, if it's full of clay, is a very reddish texture and color. How many of you have red clay around your properties? Okay? If you go down to Georgia has a lot of red clay. You go down there, and all the clay has like an orangey reddish color to it because it's full of clay and like has iron and stuff in it too. And so that's the idea of Adam, is that reddishness. Have you ever seen a baby that just comes out of the womb after its birth? What color is it? Really red, isn't it? That's what we see in the understanding of Adam, or Adam in the Hebrew. Man was formed from the dust of the ground. So he was from the earth. Man was made from the same Legos as the rest of creation. A little dirt, a little spit, and voila, there was man. It reminds me of Yeshua and the blind man in the story in John chapter 9. What did he do there? He spits on the ground, doesn't he? He bends down. There's a blind man that comes up to him and says, Master, can you help me to see? And he doesn't say, be healed. I guess he wasn't a modern televangelist, was he? But he reaches down to the ground and he scoops up some of the dirt off the ground. And he spits into it and begins to rub it together to make a clay. And when he's made that clay, he rubs it onto the man's eyes. And as he's rubbing it onto the man's eyes, the eyes of that man become whole, don't they? And he begins to see. Why that method? Well, I think the scriptures are sharing with us the power of who Yeshua is. Because it was the Creator restoring creation. In Job chapter 33 and verse 4, it says, The Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. Yeshua, I think, in that act, wasn't just showing that he had the power to heal, but I think he was correlating himself to God in the beginning of creation and how God made man. Because God made man to be unique in all of his creation. If you go back to Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 28, it says, Then God said, Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created them. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and every other living thing that moves on the earth. And so we see here in Genesis chapter 1 that man is different from all the other parts of creation. He is made in the image of God. And the Hebrew word is salim, and it means resemblance or concretely modeled or shape in a very similar way. He has attributes of the Creator. He's made in his likeness, in his resemblance. And I think those two words there, the Hebrew other word is demuth. So we have salim and demuth. And I think that there is like as Hebrew likes to double up words to say the same thing, to really add emphasis. So it's like saying he was really created in the image of God. And he's supposed to take this in the image of God. Part of what he's supposed to do, and being in his likeness, is to have dominion over his creation. The term dominion there is exactly what we think of when we think of dominion. He's to subjugate, to prevail over, to reign over, to rule over Yehovah's creation. Justinius in his lexicon says this about the Hebrew word there for dominion, radah, says it is used figuratively as to possess oneself of, to take possession of, as honey from a hive. Does a bee have much choice in a human taking the honey out of their hive? Not really. I mean, they can sting you, but that usually doesn't really keep a person from being able to take that honey from the hive. We now today as humans have very strong control over bees and how we can use honey and stuff to deal with them. We have the ability to take hive boxes to different locations and have the bees be able to pollinate different orchards and things. Man has had dominion over the bees. Jewish commentators have this concept of dominion and say it's like taking bread from an oven. So the oven there and the bread's being made, we have dominion over that bread. We take it out and then we use it for the purpose that we have for it. In Psalm chapter 8, the psalmist writes in verses 3 through 9, he says, "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you visit him?" And so we see here an understanding in David's mind between the connection between God and man, that God has relationship with man and wants that relationship with man. He shouldn't. He doesn't have to. We're just another part of his creation. But obviously there's something special there. And he goes on and says, "For you have made him a little lower than the angels, and you have crowned him with glory and honor." When you think about crowns, what do you think about? Authority, right? And rule, dominion. Man has the dominion over God's creation. You have made him, it says there, to have dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, even the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and the fish of the sea that pass through the path of the seas. O Yehovah, our master, how excellent is your name in all the earth. And so we see here in this understanding of Genesis chapter 1 that man is supposed to have dominion. It's a responsibility of mankind according to Torah law. But we're to do that within the confines and understanding of who our God is. We don't manipulate things. We don't strive to create things in our image, but are to bring back order from the chaos of sin. What we do with this world must reflect our master's understanding and the way he would want to do things. That leads me to Micah chapter 6, verse 8, which I think is a great verse that sums up the Torah into one sentence, if you wanted to say. A lot of people like this verse. A lot of Christians like this verse for what it says, because it is a great verse. What people don't understand is it's a summation of the Torah in the one sentence, one thought. It says, "He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does Yehovah require of you? But to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. That's a summation of the Torah, what our responsibility is towards Yah's creation. When we see the scriptures, we see very clearly that man is not Homo sapiens. He's not just another thing in the rest of the animal world. We are not mammals, even though the world wants to classify as that. Man is not merely another kind. Man is earth-formed, spirit-breathed, and an image bearer of the great God of the universe, given the authority of that God to rule over this world. But sin damaged that image. Sin made man into less than what he was supposed to be. Sin destroyed and broke that image of the Creator in us. Yeshua, the God-man, came to restore what was lost. John 1:14 again says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth." We saw the Father firsthand, the accounts tell us from the apostles. Hebrews 1:3 goes on and says, "Yeshua, being the brightness of his glory and the expressed image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power, when he had by himself purged our sins, sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high." 2 Corinthians 5:17, "Therefore, if anyone is in Messiah, he is a new creation. Old things are passed away, and behold, all things become new." Like the eyesight of the man restored by the spit of Yeshua, so all creation is being restored to its proper order through his shed blood. Our response upon trusting in his loving act for us is to seek to live according to its original purposes, to our original purposes, that we may show the glory and majesty of our Creator to a lost and dying world. My challenge to us today in looking at Genesis chapter 1 is not to go into the minutia of theology and trying to decide every little word there, what it all means and how we're going to put it all together and organize it ourselves and pigeonhole everybody into a certain thing. My goal is to help us to remember what the purpose of us is to be. That we're to have dominion over this world in accordance with our Creator's plan. Let us be pathfinders, clearing the way for others, helping to bring them on the path of repentance and redemption, helping them to understand that they have a loving God who loves them too and wants to bring them into relationship with him and to change their lives so that they can understand the fullness of what the scriptures means when he says that he created man in the image of himself. Let us proclaim the truth of his creation and testify against the lies of man that seek to lead so many away from the truth of Genesis 1. I hope that in sharing a lot of these things dealing with science and what man says and theology, that it puts it in your mind so that you can have an argument to give to anyone who asks, well, why do you believe that instead of this? It's not just to sit up here and rant on about it, but hopefully it is important and it gives you ammunition to defeat Satan and his lies that he has given to this world and open the eyes of people to the truth of the Word of God. Shabbat Shalom.